The dead-end road of digital editorial. No one knows what they have until they lose it. The newspaper industry has spent more than 2 decades proving that reality on a global scale. Few business ideas in modern history were accepted so quickly, pursued with such conviction, and questioned so little as the belief that digital editorial products would eventually replace the economic foundation of traditional publishing. The logic appeared undeniable. Readers were moving online. Advertisers were shifting budgets toward digital platforms. Information could be distributed instantly to anyone connected to the internet. Consultants, analysts, and investors reached the same conclusion. The future was digital, and print belonged to the past. Over time, that narrative became an unquestioned truth inside boardrooms. Publishers were told that circulation would be replaced by web traffic, print advertising would be replaced by digital impressions, subscriptions would migrate online, and physical products would gradually lose all relevance. The conclusion was accepted long before the theory was proven. As that vision gained momentum, organizations began redirecting resources toward digital projects while reducing investment in the operations that had sustained their businesses for decades. Printing plants were closed, distribution networks were reduced, productive assets were sold, staffing levels were cut. The justification was always the same. Digital growth would eventually compensate for the value that print was losing. The problem was never investing in digital technology. The problem was assuming that digital technology could replace the business model built by print. That distinction redefined the future of an entire industry. From a technological perspective, the results were impressive. Digital distribution provided instant access to information. Content could reach virtually anywhere in the world. Articles could be updated in real time. Mobile devices placed news, entertainment, and knowledge into the hands of billions of people. From an economic perspective, however, the story was very different. Traffic increased while revenue declined. Audience reach expanded while profitability weakened. Media organizations attracted millions of digital visitors only to discover that those millions did not generate the same financial results that hundreds of thousands of print readers and local advertisers once produced. The contradiction remains obvious. If digital editorial products successfully replaced print, why do media organizations continue struggling to survive? Why did so many organizations experience declining revenue while their digital audiences expanded? Why did thousands of newspapers disappear while following the very strategy that was supposedly going to save them? The answer begins with a misunderstanding that continues to influence management decisions today. Information and value are not the same thing. For generations, newspapers did not generate revenue simply because they contained information. They generated revenue because they controlled access to audiences. Readers paid for trusted content. Advertisers paid for exposure. Communities depended on newspapers as a primary source of local information. Media organizations controlled the platform and controlled the relationship with the audience. That control created value. It created negotiating power. It created advertising dependence. It created market influence. It created barriers to entry. Most importantly, it created audience ownership. Audience ownership and audience access are entirely different concepts, even though they are frequently confused. A subscriber belongs to the publisher. A social media follower belongs to the platform. A visitor arriving from a search engine belongs to the search engine. A user referred from another website belongs to whoever controls that traffic source. A rented audience is never equivalent to an owned audience. That distinction may represent one of the most expensive lessons the publishing industry has learned. For decades, media organizations owned the entire building. They controlled circulation, distribution, subscriptions, advertising, and direct relationships with readers. They established the rules and captured the value those rules generated. In pursuit of greater reach, much of the industry exchanged ownership for access. Media organizations became tenants inside digital properties owned by technology companies. The owner controlled visibility. The owner controlled content discovery. The owner controlled algorithms. The owner controlled advertising. The owner controlled traffic. The building became larger, but ownership changed hands. Most executives never fully understood the implications of that transition. The Internet transformed information into an abundant resource. News began coming from thousands of sources. Events appeared simultaneously across multiple platforms. Readers no longer depended on a single publication to remain informed. Similar content could be found on countless websites for free. The market responded exactly as economics predicts. When supply becomes virtually unlimited, protecting value becomes increasingly difficult. Media organizations digitized information, but they failed to digitize exclusivity, and that difference carried an enormous cost. For decades, a newspaper delivered to a home represented far more than news. It represented committed attention. The reader had already decided to engage with that publication before opening the first page. Advertisers understood that behavior and were willing to pay for it because the publisher controlled the environment, the experience, and the advertising exposure. The arrival of the Internet transformed all three variables. The moment content entered the digital ecosystem, it began competing against social media platforms, video platforms, streaming services, search engines, podcasts, video games, email, mobile applications, instant notifications, and, more recently, artificial intelligence-generated summaries. Media organizations gained access to larger audiences, but they lost control of them. The industry spent years celebrating audience growth while ignoring the declining value associated with those same audiences. Access can disappear with a single algorithm change. Ownership creates sustainable value. A media organization that owns its audience controls its future. A media organization that depends on borrowed audiences depends on decisions made by others. That reality became increasingly visible as organizations pursued larger traffic numbers while generating smaller financial results. Millions of visitors looked impressive in annual reports, but those visitors rarely behaved like subscribers. They arrived quickly and departed just as quickly. They consumed content without developing loyalty. They generated visibility without creating equivalent profitability. Executives began treating traffic as a substitute for circulation because the numbers appeared larger. Over time, they discovered that the two metrics represent entirely different realities. Circulation implies commitment, predictable revenue, local influence, advertising trust, and business value. Traffic often represents temporary curiosity, momentary exposure, and monetization challenges. The difference proved far more important than most imagined. As revenue began deteriorating, a dangerous cycle emerged. Management observed declining print performance and concluded that digital growth would eventually replace it. Investments in existing operations were reduced. Revenue continued falling. More resources were directed toward digital initiatives. The replacement revenue never arrived at the expected scale, and further cuts were made to the very business that was funding the transition. The strategy designed to save the company accelerated its decline. Thus, the replacement trap was born. An organization possesses a profitable business. Management identifies a new technology and assumes it represents the future. Resources begin leaving the existing business before the new alternative has been fully validated. The original business weakens. The new solution fails to meet expectations. Management responds by investing even more heavily in the replacement while continuing to weaken the system generating current revenue. The outcome is predictable. Both systems become weaker. The publishing industry did not invent this trap, but it may have become one of its most visible examples. No responsible manufacturer would shut down a profitable production line before fully validating the performance of the line intended to replace it. No airline would retire its fleet before proving the reliability of replacement aircraft. No utility company would disconnect an operational power source before confirming the stability of the next one. Yet much of the publishing industry reduced proven revenue systems based on future expectations. Potential was confused with certainty. Projections were confused with results. Opportunity was confused with profitability. The industry never proved that digital could replace print. It first assumed that it could, and then spent more than 20 years attempting to prove itself right. The consequences continue to appear in declining revenues, smaller newsrooms, reduced market influence, lower business valuations, weakened advertising relationships, and the disappearance of media organizations that once served as essential institutions within their communities. Over time, another reality emerged that became impossible to ignore. Organizations frequently cited as digital success stories were no longer selling news alone. They were selling complete ecosystems. They incorporated podcasts, specialized newsletters, financial services, sports content, educational platforms, product reviews, audio programming, video programming, and premium information services. Subscriptions no longer depended exclusively on journalism. They depended on the additional value surrounding journalism. That strategy worked for a limited number of global organizations with extraordinary resources and international audiences. It proved far more difficult for regional newspapers and community media organizations. A local newspaper cannot transform overnight into a global platform. A regional publisher cannot instantly build a digital ecosystem capable of competing against multinational organizations. Yet countless executives attempted to replicate models designed for entirely different economic conditions. The replacement never arrived at the scale required. None of this means that digital technology lacks value. On the contrary, it represents one of the most powerful communication tools ever developed. It provides speed, personalization, automation, interaction, measurement, and reach that previous generations could hardly have imagined. The danger appears when technology is mistaken for a business model. Technology creates possibilities. Business models create revenue. The two concepts are related, but they are not equivalent. History repeatedly demonstrates that new technologies rarely eliminate previous ones entirely. Radio did not eliminate newspapers. Television did not eliminate radio. The Internet did not eliminate television. Streaming did not eliminate live events. The most successful organizations rarely win by replacing one platform with another. They succeed by integrating strengths while preserving value. That may be the lesson the publishing industry has not yet fully understood. Digital should have expanded the value of print. Instead, much of the industry attempted to use digital to replace it. One strategy builds upon an existing foundation. The other dismantles the foundation while hoping a new one appears before the structure collapses. The future of publishing will not be defined by choosing between print and digital. It will be defined by the ability to understand the strengths of both and build communication systems that combine their advantages. Print continues to generate physical presence, local visibility, attention, credibility, trust, and advertiser value. Digital contributes speed, interaction, measurement, personalization, and scalability. The organizations most likely to succeed will not be those that abandon one platform to embrace another. They will be those that understand how both can coexist within a broader communication ecosystem. The real dead-end road was never digital technology. The real dead-end road was believing that digital editorial products could replace an entire business foundation simply because they could replace a distribution mechanism. Technology changed. Distribution changed. Consumer behavior changed. What never changed was the need for sustainable revenue, profitable operations, audience trust, advertising credibility, ownership of customer relationships, and the creation of business value. An industry that once owned its audience became an industry that rents access to audiences. An industry that once owned the platform became an industry dependent upon platforms. An industry that once established the rules became an industry forced to react to rules created by others. And by the time most organizations understood the difference, much of the value they were trying to protect had already begun to disappear. Because no one knows what they have until they lose it.